Marin Ashby did not flinch when the Duke of Aldenmore kicked the bucket from her hands. The water spread across the marble floor of Aldenmore's east corridor in a wide, patient arc, soaking the hem of her dress, soaking the rag she had wrung out 3 times already, soaking nothing that mattered. She stood in the middle of it, upright, both hands at her sides. The bucket had rolled to the baseboard and stopped. She did not look at her hands. She did not look at the water. She looked at him. They called her the floor girl. They called her a charity case the housekeeper had dragged in from the village because no one else would take the position at winter rates. They said she had come from nothing, which was not entirely wrong, and would amount to nothing, which was entirely incorrect. The corridor held 6 people, 2 footmen at the far end, a lady's maid frozen in the doorway, Mrs. Pelham, the housekeeper, pressing herself flat to the wall, a young undercook who had stopped breathing. Not one of them moved, not one of them said a word. Lord Aldrich Voss, the 5th Duke of Aldenmore, stood over the spreading water in riding clothes that still smelled of the road, and looked at Marin Ashby with the particular contempt of a man who has not slept in 4 days and has chosen to spend his first waking moment at home, making someone smaller feel it. He said nothing either, and then, because he turned to go, and something made him turn back, something he would not be able to name later. Not for weeks, not accurately, he looked at her face, really looked, the composure, the stillness, the way she had not backed a single inch. He went very quiet. Marin Ashby picked up the bucket. She began wringing out the rag again. Virginia, 1843. The county of Aldenmore, where the land was old and the names on it were older, and where a woman without a name moved like water around stone, and no one noticed yet what she was wearing away. If this story already has a hold on you, subscribe to the channel so you don't lose the thread when it matters most. The things Marin Ashby did not tell Mrs. Pelham when she took the position: that she had kept her father's accounts from the age of 11, that she had written his letters, managed his contracts with 3 separate timber suppliers, and caught a 14% padding error in a bill of lading without being asked. That she had studied land law for 2 years by candlelight in a room above a tanner's shop in Richmond because her father said a woman who understood land could never be entirely dispossessed, and she had believed him even after the land was gone. She said none of this. She said she was a hard worker, and she did not complain, and she was willing to take the winter rate. Mrs. Pelham had looked at her hands, looked at her face, said, "Fine." What Marin Ashby did not know about Aldenmore when she arrived: the estate had been bleeding for 3 years. The ledgers she was not supposed to see showed it plainly if you knew where to look. She knew where to look. She was not supposed to see them. She saw them on the 3rd day, when Mrs. Pelham sent her to dust the study, and the estate manager, a man named Holt, had left the quarterly summary open on the corner of the desk. Marin dusted the mantelpiece. She dusted the bookshelves. She read the summary once, upside down from 6 feet away, and filed what she saw in the back of her mind like a page pressed flat between heavier pages. The numbers did not line up, not by a small amount, not by accident. She set her cloth down and kept moving. Aldrich Voss had inherited the dukedom at 26 when his brother drowned. He was 31 now. In those 5 years he had done 3 things with consistent excellence: managed the far fields personally, refused every social invitation from the county's better families, and made himself precisely impossible to know. Not cruel, not careless. Tired, there was a difference, though the county had stopped bothering to find it. His warmth had gone somewhere. People assumed it had gone with his brother. They were not entirely wrong, but they were not entirely right either. The grief had not taken his warmth so much as it had made warmth feel like a lie he could no longer afford to tell. He had not, in 5 years, noticed anyone on his staff. He noticed Marin Ashby on day 3, not because of the bucket. He had already half forgotten the bucket by evening. He noticed her because he came into the morning room at 5 o'clock, before the house was properly awake, before anyone expected him, and found her at the small writing table near the window with her own paper and her own pencil, working figures in a column so steady and organised it looked like printed type. She did not hear him enter. He stood in the doorway for almost a full minute. She was not copying. She was calculating. He could tell the difference. He left without making a sound. She had a pencil she had bought herself, worn to 2 inches. She had a system. Both of these facts lodged in him and would not move. The position of Alden Moore's floor girl was not technically authorised to touch the household accounts. Marin was aware of this. She was also aware that the linen inventory had been shorted 4 consecutive months, that the kitchen supplier's bills were running 11% above what Mrs. Pelham believed the contract specified, and that 3 of the 4 quarterly summaries she had managed to read, in passing, in doorways, on desks where they should not have been left, contained a column labelled discretionary that did not appear anywhere in the estate's standing expenditure codes. She did not say any of this to anyone. She bought a small notebook with a week's pay and began keeping her own record. On the 14th day, Aldrich Voss walked into the corridor where Marin was relaying a strip of carpet that had come loose at the tack, and said, without preamble, "You were doing accounts in the morning room." She did not look up from the tack. "I was doing my own figures, Your Grace." "What figures?" "Personal ones." He was quiet long enough that she set down the hammer and looked at him. He had his arms crossed. He was watching her with that inventory gaze, the one that felt less like appraisal and more like documentation, as though he was simply recording what he observed. "You have the posture of someone who works with paper for a living," he said. "I work with floors for a living. At present." She picked the hammer back up. He was still watching. She drove the tack home with 3 clean strokes. "What were the figures?" he said. "Mine." He left. She allowed herself to count to 8 before she let out a breath. She did not know yet that he had gone directly to the morning room, sat down at the same small table, and looked at it for a long time as though the table might explain something. She did not know he had said nothing to Holt about the quarterly summary left open on his desk, which he had noticed too. She did not know he had been waiting for someone else to notice it first. She was wrong about being alone in what she saw. She would find this out, but not yet. It was Mrs. Pelham who broke first, 3 weeks into Marin's tenure, in the kitchen at midnight over cold tea. The housekeeper was 61 and had served the Voss family for 30 years, and had spent the last 3 watching the estate she loved bleed from a wound she could not find. "You're not just a floor girl," Mrs. Pelham said. It was not a question. Marin considered. "I am at the moment. At the moment." Mrs. Pelham poured the cold tea out and poured hot tea in. "Holt has been estate manager for 6 years. Came with a letter from the Crane family. Very well recommended, I'm sure. The discretionary column troubles me." Marin did not move. "What column is that?" Mrs. Pelham looked at her over the rim of the cup. A long look. A measuring look. "Hold your head up," the old woman said finally. "Whatever you are doing, hold your head up while you do it." She was not giving Maren the ledgers. Not yet. But she was telling her something, and Maren heard every word of it. The notebook grew. By the 6th week it contained 4 columns: the stated contract rate, the billed rate, the variance, and what the variance compounded to over 12 months. The kitchen supplier alone, $2,040. The linen merchant, $612. The discretionary column, extrapolated over 3 years from what she could reconstruct from the quarterly summaries she'd read in passing, $11,438. She wrote that figure in plain numerals and did not underline it, because it did not need underlining. She named the notebook the index. She kept it in her left boot. Aldrich Voss began appearing in rooms she was working in. He did not explain himself. He watched her work, and sometimes asked a question, and listened to the answer in that complete undivided way he had, not a social listener, an actual one. She answered plainly because anything else felt like a waste of both their time. He seemed to agree. "You reorganized the East linen closet," he said one afternoon. "It was arranged by colour. I arranged it by room. It saves 17 minutes per morning." He looked at the closet, back at her. "Who taught you systems like that?" "My father. What did your father do?" She looked at him steadily. He managed accounts. Until he couldn't any more. A pause. He did not push. That was the first time she thought there might be something behind the inventory gaze other than documentation. Something that had been patient for a very long time, and was still, somehow, patient. She had not, she would note later, told him anything true. She had told him everything true. Both of these things were accurate. The moment she refused rescue came on a Tuesday in January. Holt had shorted her wage by $3.60 and documented it as a deduction for supplies she had not ordered, and could not have ordered because the floor girl did not have supply authority. She went to Holt's office, knocked, and stated the discrepancy with her hands pressed flat against her skirt seams. Holt said the deduction was standard. She said it was not, and she had the contract terms. Holt said she had misread them. She said she had not. He looked at her with a particular smile. He said perhaps she would like to take it up with the Duke, and they would see whose reading of the contract the Duke found more persuasive. "I'll do that," she said. She did not go to the Duke. She went to Mrs. Pelham, produced the contract, and had the $3.60 restored by end of day through the household correction process, which Holt could not override without documentation he did not have. The correction went into the ledger went into the record. The record was what mattered. 3 days later, Aldrich Voss said to her, without looking up from a map he was correcting, "I heard Holt shorted your pay." It was corrected. "I would have. It was corrected through the proper process," she said. "Thank you, Your Grace." He looked up then. The inventory gaze. Something slightly different this time. Something she filed away and did not examine for another 2 weeks. "You are here because you chose it," he said. It was not a question either. "I am here because I chose it. Not because you could not leave. I can always leave." He looked at the map. A ghost crossed the corner of his mouth, the faintest suggestion of something that was not quite a smile. She went back to work. The county dinner was held in February at the Crane estate, and Maren was brought as part of the Alden Moor household staff because the Cranes required a head count, and Aldrich Voss, who hated the county dinner, insisted on bringing exactly the number of staff they had asked for, and no more. Maren had not been told she would attend until 2 hours before. She attended in her good dress, which was not very good, and her mother's brooch, which she had pinned to her collar, in the dark. Lady Estelle Crane was 64, had 600 acres, and had decided in approximately the first 90 seconds of Marin's presence that Marin was a problem. The problem was not Marin's dress or her brooch. The problem was that 3 people had asked Marin questions, and Marin had answered them accurately and directly, and this had produced, twice, a silence in which Lady Crane had lost the room's attention. At the dinner table, over soup, Lady Crane said, "I understand you manage floors for Aldenmore. How interesting that you've been brought along." "I was asked," Marin said. "And do you find the floors very illuminating?" "Some of them. The east corridor in particular has very good light in the morning." Someone at the far end of the table laughed, not meanly. Lady Crane set down her spoon. "I believe we were discussing the grain surplus. Perhaps our floor expert has an opinion." Marin had in fact read the county agricultural report for the past 4 years, because it affected the estate accounts she was reconstructing in her notebook, and she had an opinion. She delivered it in 2 sentences. One concerned the variance between reported yield and contracted sale price in the eastern properties. One concerned the county commission's grain storage fee structure, which had been revised in October and which 3/4 of the landowners at the table had not yet adjusted their quarterly projections to reflect. The table went quiet. Aldrich Voss, who had been eating his soup in perfect silence 4 seats down, did not look up. But he had gone very still. Lady Crane said, "Where did you learn that?" "I read the commission report. It was published. Most people don't read it, I know." Lady Crane looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in her face. Not warmth, not yet, but something recalibrated. Aldrich Voss set down his spoon. He said, to no one in particular, "She's right about the storage fee." "I've already adjusted." The table's attention moved to him. He gave it nothing else. He picked up his spoon again. Marin ate her soup. She did not look at him. She was aware, without looking, that he had done something deliberate, that it had cost him something, in this room to speak. She filed this too. In the carriage home they sat in silence for 11 miles. "At mile 12, he said, "you knew the storage fee structure from memory. I know figures I've read, all of them, the ones that matter. Silence the horses, the dark Virginia road. My brother used to say that a figure only matters if you know what it costs when it's wrong," he said. He said it to the window. She did not answer immediately. She gave it its proper weight. "He was right," she said finally. He did not say anything more. But something in the carriage changed in a way she could not quantify, which bothered her, because she could quantify most things. It was spring when she found the deed. She had not been looking for a deed. She had been looking for the expenditure codes that governed the discretionary column, which Holt kept insisting were standard, and which she could not locate in any of the 3 code books she'd managed to cross-reference. She had been allowed, after the county dinner, to work in the study as a copyist on legitimate household correspondence, which gave her proximity to the shelving without authority over anything on it, which was exactly as much as she needed. The deed was in a file marked Survey Records, 1839. It was for a parcel of 42 acres on the estate's southern boundary. It was dated correctly. It was signed by the previous Duke. It was also, based on the ink colour relative to the surrounding documents and a slight indentation in the signature line that no quill should have produced, written at least 8 years after the date it bore. Marin set it back in the file. She sat very still for a moment. She thought the parcel had been sold. She had seen the sale noted in the quarterly summary. She had assumed it was a straightforward loss. She now understood it was not a loss. It was a transfer. The land had been transferred to a buyer she did not yet know, at a price she had not yet confirmed, under a deed that had been constructed after the fact to make the transfer appear legitimate. Holt had been estate manager for 6 years. The previous Duke had been dead for 5. She thought about this for exactly 4 seconds. Then she opened her copybook and began writing. She needed ink colour samples. She needed the chain of title for that parcel for the previous 15 years. She needed the buyer's name, which would be in the county recorder's office, which she could not access directly, but which Mrs. Pelham's cousin, a notary clerk in Aldenmore town, might be able to access if asked in the right way. She needed 2 more weeks. She told no one. That was not entirely true. On the evening of the 4th day, she went to Mrs. Pelham's sitting room and sat down and said, "I need to ask you something about the survey files." Mrs. Pelham put down her mending. Marin told her what she had found. Not all of it. Enough, she told it plainly, without inflection, the way you read out figures that have already decided what they mean. Mrs. Pelham was quiet for a long time. How long, she said? At minimum 3 years. More likely 5. The whole of his time here. Yes, Mrs. Pelham picked her mending back up. She did not sew, she just held it. "My cousin's name is Theodora Finch," she said. "She works Tuesdays and Thursdays. Marin went on Thursday." What Theodora Finch found in the county recorder's office, the 42-acre parcel, had been conveyed to a land consortium operating under the name Millbridge Holdings. Millbridge Holdings had 3 partners. One of them was Edward Holt. A second was the Crane family solicitor. The third was a man named Reeves, who had also, as it happened, countersigned 2 of the 3 contested quarterly summaries. Marin had enough. She was wrong. 4 days before she intended to bring her documentation to Aldrich Voss, Holt moved first. He filed, through the county clerk, a competency petition against the estate's current management structure, not a standard filing, but a targeted one, citing irregularities in correspondence and suggesting that the estate's records had been accessed without authorization by an unknown third party. He named no one directly. He did not need to. The petition was enough to trigger a preliminary hearing, which was enough to freeze the estate accounts pending review, which was enough to buy him time to move the Millbridge assets before anyone could attach them. He had done this before. Marin realized it the moment Mrs. Pelham showed her the notice. He had known, or suspected, and had prepared this. The petition was not a defence, it was a weapon. Marin sat with the notice for 4 seconds. She went and found Aldrich Voss. He was in the far field, on horseback, looking at a fence line. She walked out to him on foot, and stood in the muddy grass below his stirrup, and said, "Holt has filed a competency petition. He has 3 weeks before a preliminary hearing. I have 11 months of documented irregularities, a forged deed, a chain of title connecting him to a consortium that received fraudulent conveyances from this estate, and copies of everything. I made 2 copies of everything. One is with Mrs. Pelham, one is with me. I need to know if you want to see it or if you intend to handle this another way." He looked at her for a long time from the saddle. "How long have you known?" he said. "I found the deed 6 weeks ago. I suspected the accounts for 3 months before that. Why didn't you tell me? I didn't have enough. Now I do." The horse moved. He held it steady. The inventory gaze had something in it she had not seen before. Not surprise exactly. Something closer to being settled. "You are a floor girl," he said, "at present." He dismounted. They walked back to the house together in the mud and the cold March air, and he did not say another word. Which was fine, because she had said everything that needed saying. The hearing was held in the Aldenmore County Courthouse on the second Thursday in April. The circuit examiner was a man named Garvey, 60 years old, who had ink-stained fingers and the particular patience of someone who has heard every kind of lie and has learned to wait for the paper. Holt arrived with 2 attorneys and a leather satchel, and the Crane family solicitor, whose name was Partridge, and who had the slightly fixed expression of a man who understood, approximately 40 minutes into the morning's testimony, that the documents in his own satchel had been anticipated and addressed. Marin Ashby was not the petitioner. She was listed as a material witness. She sat at the side table with the index, and the copies, and the chain of title documentation, and the deed, sealed in a paper folder with a date she had written on the outside and initialed. And she did not fidget. She did not look at Holt. She looked at Examiner Garvey, and she answered every question he asked her in plain, full sentences with figures attached. The examiner had a way of going still when testimony landed. He went still several times. He asked about the discretionary column. She told him the figure, $11,438 across 36 months, documented to the month, cross-referenced against the original contract expenditure codes that had not, in fact, been updated to authorise the column, which she had confirmed with the county administrative clerk, whose own notation she had obtained and brought with her. He asked about the deed. She explained the ink variants. She had brought a sample from the same file, a letter dated from the same period, using the same quill by evident comparison, and laid them side by side, and let him look. He looked for a long time. He asked if she had any corroboration of the Millbridge connection. She gave him Theodora Finch's notarized recorder's extract, and the 3 partnership signatures. Holt's attorney objected twice. Garvey overruled both times without explanation. The Crane solicitor, Partridge, had gone a particular colour that was not healthy. Aldrich Voss testified for 11 minutes. He confirmed the chain of custody for the documents Marin had brought him. He confirmed that he had personally reviewed her record and found it accurate and internally consistent. He confirmed that he had, following review, authorised the county clerk to flag the Millbridge conveyances for attachment pending this hearing. He stated this in the same flat, direct manner he used for everything. No performance. No theatre. Holt's attorney made a last attempt, suggesting that Marin's records were self-serving and unauthorised. Examiner Garvey turned and looked at him for a moment over his spectacles. "She made copies," Garvey said. 2, before the petition was filed. Dated and initialed. He set the papers down. That is not the behaviour of someone falsifying a record. That is the behaviour of someone who knew a record might be disputed and protected it. Holt was given the opportunity to confess the full amount and arrange restitution with attached assets, in lieu of a criminal referral. He took it. His attorney took it for him, actually, because Holt had been looking at the floor since the Millbridge documents appeared and had not fully recovered. Partridge resigned from his practice that afternoon. Reeves, the 3rd partner, left the county. No one pursued him very hard. He was not worth the energy. Examiner Garvey, before he adjourned, looked at Marin Ashby and said, "This is thorough work." "Thank you," she said. "I mean it as a professional observation. I received it as one. He almost smiled. She was becoming familiar with the phenomenon. The estate accounts were unfrozen by the following Tuesday. What came after, not all at once, and not loudly, and not in the way she had imagined it when she imagined it at all. Aldrich Voss asked her to come to the study that evening. He had a fire going, he had 2 cups of tea. He had a document on the desk, which she recognised as a draft contract, and he pushed it toward her without preamble. It was an offer of the estate manager's position, full authority over accounts, contracts and property documentation. A salary that was not winter rates. She read it completely before she said anything. This is more than the position is generally paid, she said. It is what the position is worth when done correctly. She looked at him. He was looking at the fire. There is a condition, she said. There isn't. Most offers have conditions. This one doesn't. He picked up his tea. Set it down. You did the work. The position follows the work. That is the whole of the reasoning. She thought about this for a moment. She thought about her father's accounting books, worn at the corners, about the notebook she had bought with a week's wages and kept in her boot, about $11,438 recovered in a courthouse on a Thursday morning. She picked up the pen and signed the contract. He watched her sign it. The inventory gaze had shifted again. It had been shifting for weeks, in increments she had been cataloguing, without quite admitting she was cataloguing them. This was not documentation anymore. This was something else. You could have told me in November, he said. When you first saw the accounts, I didn't have enough. You had enough to warn me. Warnings without proof are just noise. She set the pen down. You would have investigated. Holt would have moved everything faster. You would have lost more than you recovered today. He was quiet. I needed 3 months, she said. So I took them, while working as a floor girl. At the time. Something happened at the corner of his mouth. Not the ghost of the almost smile, the actual thing. Small, real, gone in a second. She noted it. She filed it in a place that was no longer the back of her mind. Spring turned. The estate turned with it. The 42 acres from the Millbridge conveyance were recovered through legal attachment and returned to the Aldenmore rolls by June. The kitchen supplier's contract was renegotiated at the correct rate. The linen merchant received a formal notice of breach and settled the drainage field in the East Quarter, which had been mismanaged for 2 years because no one had noticed the survey error that sent the runoff the wrong direction, was corrected by September at Marin's recommendation, and the cost of the fix came in at 1/3 of what the previous estimate had been. Because she had read 3 engineering reports and knew what the actual problem was, she hired a young woman from the village to assist with correspondence. The young woman's name was Clara, and she was 17 and extremely quick, and Marin paid her a full rate and put the position in the employment ledger correctly. Mrs. Pelham watched all of this from the kitchen with the expression of someone who had waited 30 years for something to stop being broken, and was not sure whether to cry or simply go on as usual. She went on as usual. But she made Marin a cake in September and left it on the desk in the estate office without explanation. Marin ate it over the quarterly summary. The numbers were right. Lady Estelle Crane appeared at Aldenmore in October. She came in the morning unannounced, which was her prerogative, and asked to speak with the estate manager. She was shown to the office and found Marin there, behind the desk, with Clara on the opposite side transcribing. Lady Crane sat down without being asked. She said, "I did not know what Partridge was doing." "I know," Marin said. The documentation was Holt's. Partridge was an addendum. I should have known. Yes, Lady Crane was quiet. She was 64 years old and had 600 acres and the fixed expression of a woman who had not apologised for many things in her life. She was working up to it. Maren let her work. "I was unkind to you at dinner," Lady Crane said. "Before I understood who you were. You were unkind to who you thought I was," Maren said. "That is its own problem." A silence. "That is fair," Lady Crane said. She looked at Clara, at the ledgers, at the desk, at Maren's hands, which were still, resting plain and flat. "I would like to discuss a supply arrangement for the Crane properties. I need someone who reads commission reports." Maren regarded her. "I have time on Wednesdays," she said. The year turned again. In December, Aldrich Voss came into the estate office at 7 in the evening, and did not knock, which was his right, and stood in the doorway until Maren looked up from the drainage review. "I owe you something," he said. She set her pencil down. "You don't." "I do." He came in and sat in the chair across the desk, which was not his usual behaviour. He put something on the desk between them. It was a document. She recognised the header, a county property registration. She read it. It was a parcel. 8 acres on the estate's northern edge, adjoining the village. Her name was on it as registered owner. The registration was dated that day. She looked up at him. "That is not the position," he said. "The position pays a salary. This is different. This is yours outright, because you are the reason there is anything left to divide." Her hands were flat on the desk. She looked at the registration again. "I didn't do it for land," she said. "I know." He looked at the fire. "That is precisely why it seemed right to give you some." She was quiet for a long time. "You could have put it in the estate accounts," she said finally, "written it as a disbursement." "I could have. You didn't." "No," she looked at him. He was looking at the desk, at the space between them, at nothing precisely. His jaw was set and his hands were on his knees, and the inventory gaze was pointed inward for once, which was a different thing entirely. "Aldrich," she said, his given name. "The first time." He looked up. She had prepared nothing. She had no column for this. She said the plainest thing she knew. "I see you." He was very still. "I have," she said, "since November." The fire moved. Outside, the cold Virginia night went on doing what it did. A door closed somewhere in the house. The small sounds of a place that was no longer bleeding. He reached across the desk and turned his hand over, an offering, not a demand. She set her hand in his. Fingers folded. She allowed herself to feel the warmth of it, which was considerable, and did not count to anything. She had not needed rescuing. She had needed to be seen. Those were different things. Maren Ashby, estate manager of Oldenmoor, later Maren Voss. Later Maren Voss, who received 3 more county consultancy contracts by 1846, and who in 1848 founded the Oldenmoor Land Record Society, a voluntary organisation that trained women in property documentation, county recording procedure, and the detection of title fraud, had not, at the beginning of any of it, asked to be given anything. She had simply made herself impossible to overlook. The Society's founding document was written in her own hand in the estate office on a Wednesday morning in April, with Clara beside her, and it was notarized by Theodora Finch, who had travelled 20 miles to do it and refused payment. Mrs. Pelham attended the founding meeting and sat in the back and said nothing, and afterward, on the way out, pressed Maren's hand once and said, "There it is." The 42 acres were fully integrated back into the estate rolls by 1847. The drainage field yielded its best harvest in a decade in 1845. Lady Crane became, in the way of people who have recalibrated, a genuine advocate for the society, and she funded the first library of county records that the society maintained for public reference, and she never again confused a woman's position with her worth. Clara became a notary clerk in 1849. Maren wrote her a letter of recommendation that was 2 pages long and stated plainly, "She is the most accurate reader of a disputed document I have ever trained." Aldrich Voss served on the Society's first advisory board and contributed nothing to its proceedings except his name at the top of the membership roll and, once, a quiet observation during the 3rd quarterly meeting that the Society's record-keeping was the finest he had encountered in 20 years of land management. He said it to the room. He said it on the record. He sat back down and said nothing else. Maren had looked at him across the table and felt something that required no column and no cross-reference. That was the whole of it, and it was enough. And it was everything. She had come to Aldenmore with a pencil worn to 2 inches, a notebook she kept in her boot, and the knowledge that figures do not lie if you read them honestly. She had left nothing to chance and nothing to rescue. She had pressed her hands flat and kept working and waited for the record to speak, which it always does in the end. Her name on the Society's founding document read Maren Voss, née Ashby. Founder, it was the first time she had seen it written in its entirety, in her own hand, and she let it stand without correction because it required none. She had always been exactly this. The room had simply caught up. The moment she signed that land deed, her own name, in her own hand, on something no one could take, that is the image that stays. If this story settled something in you, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, when did you first know that Aldrich truly saw her? Was it the bucket, the carriage ride home, or the document on the desk? And drop your city too. I want to see how far Maren's story travels. Another one is already waiting for you.